Improve the power of evil! Evil!
The power of evil. Does the power of evil need improvement?
It needs to be fixed. It doesn't work that smoothly anymore, you know?
Does it?
Needs some grease. Yeah.
Then, I don't know. Has the power of evil just gotten old and rusty?
Yeah, it's not agile anymore. You know, it needs to be improved. Absolutely.
You need to put evil into a wheelchair and rock it out to get some sunlight.
I like the ambient light, by the way.
The ambient light that enables itself. So,
Look at that.
So, enough tomfoolery. So, here in my studio, welcome, by the way.
Hello.
We have my friend Florian, who is the main man behind Ingurgitating Oblivion. And I've had... I've had the opportunity and good fortune to be working...
And I like cookies.
Everybody likes cookies.
Especially served by Mr. Fountainhead.
Well, you got my last cookie, so... That's how much I like you, and that's almost as much as I like being a part of the new Ingurgitating Oblivion album.
Mm-hmm.
It says the King of Transitions. So...
Remind me of transition as a concept.
Transition.
I'd like to share a little story about Mr. Lillegruber of Defeated Sanity later on.
What is he transitioning into? He's always transitioning. I just don't know into what exactly.
I recall, and I hope he forgives, me sharing this. I do recall that he once told me, Florian, I had these two motives, as in musical motives, and I tried to transition from the one key into the other key, and it took me weeks and weeks to figure it out, and studying and blah blah. And I think he listened to I don't know, Madonna or Rihanna, or
as he tends to do. It was probably Mariah Carey.
Mariah Carey, and then he realized, it was for Defeated Sanity. This is the way I'm going to transition from one key into the other. And I realized, I would never, ever. I think about all sorts of things compositionally, but about transitions, kind of racking my mind for many, many weeks to combine one death metal riffs with the other. Okay. I wouldn't do that. But anyway, that's...
But Lilla would.
Yeah, but Lilla would, and he's awesome. Yeah. And then you listen to it.
Yeah.
Wow, beautiful transition into. So funny.
Shout out to our friend Lilith. So we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So you are here because I worked on an album that you did, which is quite fantastic. And like I said before, I don't think I can recall an album that I've been a part of, apart from my own albums, that transports me the way that the new Ingurgitating Oblivion album does, and that invokes in me these feelings that I had as a kid and as a teenager when listening to albums like Cynic, Focus, Death, Individual Thought Patterns, Pestilence, Weirds, all these classic death metal albums that are not just death metal albums that bring the brutality that just make you go but that also transport you into a different dimension, that just transport your mind, your body, your spirit, and that is precisely
Nocturnus. I love Nocturnus.
Yeah. I think I missed the boat on that one a little bit. So all of that, I think, for me, is present when I do listen to the new Ingurgitated Oblivion tracks, and I just want to know more about what led to this. What is the history of the band? What is your role in all of that? And how did it evolve piece by piece from the last album, which was already fantastic, which is how I got to know you guys, which is called Visions of Wallowing in Light. Is that
Vision Wallows in Symphonies of
Light. To the newest one, which I don't think has a title yet.
Yes, it does.
It does.
It's going to be entitled Ontology of Naught.
Ontology of Naught. Ontology of Naught. Fantastic.
Yeah.
So, if you could be so kind to give us a brief overview of how the band started and how it did evolve.
All right, I'm going to pitch it now.
You're going to pitch it now. Pitch it to me.
Teenager, listening to, brutality, resurrection, Exit 13, hypocrisy, you name it, right? Incantation, immolation, blah, 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 blah. Obituary. Yeah, so especially the cause of death stuff. And loved it, right? Totally disincarnate, and so on.
Yeah.
My Dying Bride, Cathedral, Disembowelment, whatever they're called, know what I mean. Anathema. So that was kind of my background. Doom and old school 1990s death metal, and come from a very musical background. My father is a musician. It was all kind of finger style picking. Peter Finger, Hannes Wader, Silverkrupp, people like this, right. Peter Roland, and classical music, jazz music. My mother would always say, it's kind of sonic environmental pollution. That's, I think, what she referred to when he listened to Miles Davis and Coltrane, etc. Right. So I was, totally exposed to this musical universe. Would practice my ass off, sitting autistically on my bed, playing the stuff, felt hesitant to kick things off, had this idea of starting my own band. Mm-hmm. But why did I feel hesitant? Because I had these grandiose ideas, and I didn't want to go to the rehearsal facility with, I was a mediocre musician back in the days myself, with a bunch of mediocre musicians, and then destroy this immaculate, perfect vision, right? At some point I did, I think it was in 1995, 1996, started a band called Of Trees and Orchids. That's the original name, and I like to refer to this band as belonging to the Ingurgitating Oblivion history. Mm-hmm. All I did after 2 albums, Fragmente aus dem Fließenden and Thought Cathedral, was changing the band's name to make it sound more death metal. And, took it from there. Demos, Unmatched Brutality, signed us. Interestingly, thinking of Broder Quinn and all that. And we released, which people refer to as our first album, always feels funny to me because I had a history of 10 years with all the demos, and I'd consider it albums, but they were not officially released. Under the name of Ingurgitating Oblivion, and then, things would evolve, basically. Right. Loads and loads of lineup changes, and, you know the story.
Yeah. Right. So, at what point did Ingurgitated Oblivion transition from being a band that rehearses and that has like a steady personnel into what is now currently basically a studio project?
All right. I studied in the UK, and I studied in Oldenburg, which is in northwestern Germany, and basically as a teenager, I would just hang out in both these places and work with the people who were around. My brother used to play the bass as the first bassist in the band, and just the neighbor would be the vocal. Just people who we didn't have cars, so we had to kind of find some sort of arrangement, which used to be difficult at times, personality-wise, and technically also. That's why kind of the lineup would change consistently, and we would really be a conventional, traditional band performing live until I'd say 2007, 2008. Then I moved, stupid idea, to a place called Stuttgart, which is where Porsche and Mercedes come from, and Bosch and all these big corporations, and that's where I moved due to professional commitments and a lady back in the days, and stayed there and started commuting, which was a drain on my financial resources, but also energy resources. And why? Because I had this traditional notion in the back of my mind, okay, if you want to play in a band, you need to physically meet these people, who were based in Oldenburg, which is in the northwestern part of Germany, 800 kilometers almost every second week. Stupid, right? And then I got into trouble with them as well, due to, well, a plethora of reasons, and realized it doesn't have to be, traditional and all that. And with Vision, Wallows and Symphonies of Light, I realized, okay, I can perfectly work. That's the main drive. I want to create, evolve, produce, publish music.
Yeah.
And kind of go through this process. That's lovely, of giving birth to something artistic. That's the main drive. And at the moment, maybe as a perspective, we want to perform it live on stage again. But at the moment, it's all about the creation. That's probably in 2008, 2009 that it started like this.
Right. So, first of all, so that is on the horizon in the future, that you do want to bring Ingurgitated Oblivion on the stage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, as a perspective, for sure.
And secondly, earlier you mentioned a situation in the studio way back in the day that was an epiphany triggering moment for you. Could you go back to that?
What do you mean?
You described the situation when you were still a traditional band with members, and you were in the studio recording.
Yeah.
And you had an epiphany when there was a disagreement. Could you go into that a little bit?
Oh, well, right, that's kind of all that bitching, right? And kind of, because, say, psychologically, it's always challenging, kind of leading a band, steering it in one or the other direction, finding arrangements, people feeling dissatisfied because of all sorts of things, feeling challenged, realizing their own limitations, having been lazy, not practicing properly, realizing that they haven't practiced properly at the rehearsal facility, all these things. And I had this epiphany when one of the guys, that was the continuum of absence phase of my band, of Ingurgitating Oblivion, said at the studio, "Hey Florian, I played some overdub, some second voice, right, on the guitar, and they said, you didn't present what you're playing right now to us, in advance, and therefore you mustn't, you mustn't deviate from what we think you're gonna record." And I realized it sounds like a little episode, but fundamentally speaking, that's such an essential thing, and I don't want to feel obstructed, limited whatsoever. As Chuck Schuldiner, and I'm, by the way, happy that you picked Individual Thought Patterns, one album which is particularly dear to me, even though he shouldn't have dissed Paul Masvidal on The Philosopher. That's pretty stupid, but anyway, but that's another bitch story, I guess. Which I went through as well, and he said, "Let the metal flow. There needs to be some sort of, unobstructed, free-flowing system of energies," and that's exactly what I am about as a person. And I don't want to feel limited by anybody, and I don't want to limit anybody either. I want to feel free in the band, and to me, it's a recluse almost, where it's a perfect world, because there is freedom, and I don't have to justify anything, like in a job or whatever. And there's all these cheesy people who say, you can achieve utter freedom when you work professionally, blah, blah, blah. There is these limiting factors, and I want to appreciate and sort of venerate almost this as a sacred place where there is no such thing as obstruction.
Right.
And that was my epiphany. And on the other hand, when I work with great musicians like you, who am I to limit? And no, you mustn't do that. We can communicate, we can have some sort of dialogue, but you are the expert. I can't play the fretless guitar. I can't. Why should I channel or direct this in any way? And that's the case with Lille, that's the case with Jan, that's the case with Ava. They are not just skilled, they are fantastic musicians and human beings, and they're way better than, when it comes to performing vocals or whatever they do, or playing the recorder with Daniel, or playing the drums or the guitar. They're the experts. And who am I to kind of limit them? So why? So that's completely runs counter to my philosophy in life. So that's why it feels very free in Ingurgitating Oblivion.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would argue that this is also, since you mentioned Chuck and Let the Metal Flow, this is one of the, at least in my personal opinion, the one of the cornerstones of why we love metal in the first place, because it meant freedom. It meant the freedom to do things that you couldn't explore otherwise in more established traditional styles. It was breaking rules that had been established over time.
Absolutely.
And I think that it is so important to keep that spirit alive in metal, because I see a tendency to fall into the same traps as generations of musicians have before, where everything has become formulaic, and there has been these unspoken rules established that that don't need to be there, that can be broken, and that sometimes have to be broken in order for new forms to emerge and new combinations. And I think that especially this new album, taking everything that you've done in the past to a new extreme and a new level in terms of quality, at least as far as I'm concerned, I think it does that really well, just going to places that you wouldn't expect and that not necessarily have been visited in metal ever before. And that's beautiful, and that's why I love it so much.
Thank you.
So what I would like to know, though, is how do you arrive at that point? How does a Ingurgitating Oblivion piece come into existence? What is the process?
Different perspectives. First one, probably rather psychological, is, obviously it originates from, a constellation of human beings and minds who then kind of give birth to an entity which is a track, right? So it's a highly complex system, basically. And again, in this system, there is hardly any limitations. There is limitations which I like to refer to as structural limitations. If something doesn't work, if something is not to the point, if something is not well intonated, if something is not concise, if something is not precise, if something is not tight, I don't want to have discussions about tightness anymore. I grew up and I grew out of that. I had these discussions back in the days, and that's completely unacceptable for me. So it's free. When I talk about myself, I listen to, Frank Zappa, I listen to Tay Ripdahl, I listen to, we both are lovers of Holdsworthian beauty, right?
Absolutely.
I love this. Matthias Eick, so a lot of jazz, different, subgenres of jazz, probably, I suppose, jazz rock, Rush, but Tay Ripdahl has always been...
I'm so glad that you're mentioning him.
He's amazing.
Fantastic.
And that's someone, when it comes to tone, intonation, effects, atmosphere, and all that, is extremely... Rabi Abu Khalil is another totally different thing, but it's also... a combination or like a mixture of different styles, more Western and obviously with more Eastern traditional music. And he worked a lot with Rabi Abu Khalil with Western jazz musicians. And that's kind of the background I have. And it's also, to put it the Jungian way, you have different ways of perception. That's just a case. And that just a fact. And I have a tendency to look at things holistically, and I listen and I sense everything at once. I don't, Norbert, the guy who's kind of my closest brother in Ingurgitating Oblivion, he always goes crazy because I spot everything. I don't miss anything which might be imperfect in the recording because I listen, I perceive everything. On the other hand, when it comes to kind of structuring the whole thing in a more traditional way, I struggle with that. That's something I don't like, and it doesn't come to me naturally. So that's kind of the psychological perspective. On the other hand, it's obviously the great musicians, right? The awesome musicians who contribute. Jan, for instance, who renders, kind of who contributes the vibraphone stuff. He's got a post-rock jazz background, so Godspeed You Black Emperor and Exploding Star Orchestra. He's a big Miles Davis and Coltrane, kind of fan himself, but he doesn't have a metal background whatsoever. He doesn't distance himself from metal. Rather the opposite. He's a musician, and the genre is unessential to him 100%. He loves Meshuggah, right? And he would dig them 100%, and because he doesn't care about the genre, but he can listen to Godspeed You Black Emperor and at the same time appreciate Meshuggah for their polyrhythmic approach. Yeah. So it's the musicians, it's the psychological part, and what I do is I start writing the guitar lines with a certain longing. I go on and I go on and I go on. It's like going for a walk. At some point I've had enough. At some point I feel satisfied. At some point I have the sensation of closure, and then the song is done. And the tendency is right there, rather extensive.
So it's an intuitive process, yes. Way more than an intellectual process.
It is very intellectual, I'd say. And when it comes to the second guitar voice, then it's perfectly planned and organized and structured. But with the say fundamental guitar voice, I'm totally free flowing.
Right, yeah. And that is the starting point. Everything else evolves from that.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
So, do you ever write for your musicians and your collaborators, or is that something that just comes to you after the fact? This would fit this person, or just is that just an intuition? Let's see what this person could do with what we already have.
That point, the second point you just mentioned, I do my stuff, which is the guitars. Then usually, it's perfectly recorded on click tracks, and then there is two guitars on a click track, or different tempos of click tracks, and then I share it with Lille from Defeat Sanity, really shit drummer.
Unfortunately, it's a shame that we have to work
I have to
with this
explain
guy.
everything. He doesn't get it.
Yeah.
Awesome guy. Shout out to Lille. Very close friend of mine. Used to be a neighbor of mine as well in Berlin. And then I share it with him, and he takes it from there. And then it grows. There is a dialogue. I provide feedback. I don't limit at all, because the people I have the great fortune and pleasure of working with, they are as much part of or responsible for the sound at the end of the day as I am. I just kick things off initially. But what I usually do is, this is a great passage, a great part of the song for a recorder, for a bass recorder, for Daniel, right? The guy who's part of the current album, or this is a great part for my friend Tom, right? For you, that's something I do decide and I do discuss and I listen to it. I analyze the piece and then I take this decision. But in advance, I just don't do this. This happens for some reason.
All right. So, moving on from the music a little bit, also the lyrical content and the, kind of the tendency for long format is also present in the song titles, in the album titles, and the artwork. So, how important is that to Ingurgitating Oblivion as a concept, and where does it come from?
The abundance of titles and the length. All right, okay. I studied literature and linguistics. Why? Because I like reading and I like kind of delving into worlds obscure and wide and deep and whatever. And I studied American and British literature and linguistics, and there are just authors like Herman Melville, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Jack London, Edgar Allan Poe, obviously, of course, H.P. Lovecraft, but also Lord Dunsany, Eldon and Blackwood. I'm a big lover of John Milton, clearly, Byron. I just love it. I just love respectful use of language. If you take Jack London, for instance, obviously he thought about what are dignified ways of coexisting as human beings. He would think about, studied Jungian psychology quite a lot. So obviously, with the Call of the Wild books, novels, he would focus on nature, say primitive origins of life, kind of a wolf reverting back, a domesticated a dog reverting back into a wolf, and the other way around as well, because there are kind of two twin novels, the sea wolf, blah blah blah. So I love kind of studying that and thinking about it, and that's kind of where the lyrics come from. So concepts I'm personally interested in non-existence, primordial psychology, primordial essences of life. Jungian psychology is super interesting for me personally, and that's something I dwell on in the lyrics, I guess. Yeah, a love for language and for literature. Yeah.
Right. Oh. Also, you have what I consider to be a pretty interesting occupation as a day job.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, how does that play into the music, into the lyrics, and also into the idea of what a band is and could be? And could you talk about that?
So my occupation, first of all, you mean that?
Yeah.
I work as a consultant, and my main interest and focus professionally is leadership. Psychology of human leadership. So it's a lot about charisma. So how does charisma work religiously, but also when it comes to interpersonal interaction, different personality structures, shadow work. That's Jungian psychology again. How does behavior evolve? Where does it come from? What kind of conversations are going on? I study, say, patterns of language quite a lot because, I have a degree in psycholinguistics. So that's something which I find fascinating. So this consultancy job is about leadership development. So it's training, seminars, business coaching, stuff like that. It's personnel diagnostics, potential analysis. So I analyze potential, but also competency, and there's two different things in leadership, and that's maybe if I think about that concept, thinking about potential is definitely kind of something that propels the music of Ingurgitating Oblivion as well, right? Because I might have shared that with you, but the band started with a vision. With an idea, and I was afraid and hesitant to kind of make it real, to actually practice and kind of take an instrument, and in my case the guitar, and play the whole thing, and kind of accept compromises with a drummer who couldn't perform the music perfectly. But still. There was this vision, and a vision is essential, as in German we call this Richtungspfeil. So you need to strive for something, and it needs to be so attractive so that you make sure that you kind of go along the way in order to achieve that goal, obviously, and that requires a lot of willpower, resilience, self-reflection, all that, and that's a concept which is relevant to me in my job for sure. So when I do leadership or potential analysis, I always check out how self-reflected, how much willpower is there, behavioral bandwidth is key, and that's kind of potential factors,
right.
Indicators.
Could you describe that term a little bit more closely? Behavioral bandwidth.
Exactly. So different people, different personality typologies and structures. So I don't know, someone is very detail-oriented. Somebody is very stimulus-oriented. Somebody is very concise. Someone is the exact opposite, rather long-winded. Someone has an aesthetic motive. Someone has a rather pragmatic one. So different people, different personalities, typologies, and how do you interact with the person if you want to kind of function beautifully with this person, and if you kind of always stick to what comes to you naturally, it's always the same behavior you apply, and it's 100% predictable that this will restrict you in your success if you are not adaptive at all, in your own behavior. And that's why there needs to be behavioral bandwidth,
Right.
which is then rewarded by the counterpart because the counterpart likes it. And that's why you need to have some sort of sensible reciprocal system when interacting with people, behavioral bandwidth, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
So how does this system play into the way that the band is working and the way that the music is progressing from one player to the next?
Behavioral bandwidth can possibly be translated into the fact that I work with awesome musicians like you, like Jan, like Lille. And at some point, I think was Vision, Wallace and Symphonies of Light, where I realized this has been my main challenge throughout the years, because the musicianship and the level of the musicianship was the issue. And there, all of a sudden, there was no limitation anymore, and that's why there was behavioral bandwidth. If you want to translate that system into the music, so that was perfect. At the same time, there is always a vision, and we strive for this vision, which is a perfect propeller and a perfect. It can be painful in a way, but the vision is so clear and so attractive, it propels us to the next level over and over and over again. And that's why I think we've been progressing quite quickly over the last two albums. And when I say two, I include the current album as well, which will be entitled Ontology of Naught.
I can attest to that. Yeah. Beautiful. Speaking about the new album,
yes.
There's quite an interesting lineup of personalities and different kinds of musicians on it. Quite an extensive team, and I would like to ask you to give us a quick rundown of all the people involved with the band at this point right now, and how you came to be acquaintances and friends.
And I'll do my very best not to forget anybody, because that's important to me, because I kind of consider this, a bit of a family.
Right.
And so you, Tom Fountainhead, we got to know one another, I think, through Lille of Defeated Sanity. I had you on my radar for many, many years, because you obviously, kind of love the fretless 7-string, 6-string, 7-string mostly, if I recall correctly, and found this very, very interesting. Loved your compositions, loved the videos also, and that it was clear, that we'd work together. To me, Lille of Defeated Sanity, he used to be a neighbor of me. He's based in Berlin as well. Love Defeated Sanity. Have been in love with everything they do. He does, and he's just awesome. Fantastic musician and great guy. Jan, who's a very close friend of mine, very old friend of mine. I got to know him in Oldenburg, which is where I studied. And he used to be the boyfriend of my former band flatmate, who was a musician herself and played the violin, to my detriment, I have to say, because every once in a while she tried to dampen the sound, but still she was living next door, in the next room. So he's a vibraphone guy. He's got more of a jazz, post-rock, new music kind of background. And he's been, even on a continuum of absence, so he's been participating and contributing to many albums already. Daniel, I got to know Daniel through Lille. He's a guy, classically trained flutist, plays the recorder, C recorder, bass recorder, so different instruments there. Interestingly, and I learned later, he's got kind of Swedish death metal background as well, which I found interesting. He plays in orchestras, different quartets, different formations. He's a classical guy, but also very experimental. He does the traditionally European, mainly, I think he's got a Middle Eastern background originally. You can kind of sense that a little, but I think traditionally he's studied European Western classical music, if I may call it that, and but also more experimental stuff. There's Mehdi, who's a friend of mine from Tehran in Iran. He contributed because that was a big desire I had. And Dream, I'm in love with Persian as a language and Hafiz as a poet, and he contributed some poetry by Hafiz. So that's Mehdi. Ava Bonham, who's a very extremely impressive person, I think, and musician. She's a vocal coach and a natural path. And she's got a black metal background as well, interestingly.
Which I never knew.
Yeah, crazy.
Wouldn't have guessed in a million years.
But not the I'm sorry, the pussy black metal, but the real black metal. So I don't need to waste time trying to convey and explain to her, I'm about this and that feeling and emotional. She gets it instantaneously. She's a fantastic singer and vocalist, and so she's part of the album as well. Chris Zukas, who's a Greek friend of mine based in Athens. He's an incredible traditional Greek folk background, jazz background, and the most extreme as in technicality death metal guy I know, and his bass lines are tasteful, incredibly tight, and incredibly intriguing. I think he's amazing. And Norbert, who's responsible of all the technical stuff, all the production, all the mastering, all the mixing, everything. He's a technical genius, I have to say. Extremely laid back, great guitarist as well. He contributes some of the solos and some of the rhythm guitars as well. And I hope I didn't forget anybody. I think that's the lineup at the moment. Yeah. And Celine, who's a great French piano player, 12-tone music. I know that's debatable. What kind of 12-tone musician, composer you prefer? We've had that discussion. But she's not skilled. She's amazing. And usually everything first take. The amount of minutes you hear or can listen to her contribution on the album is basically the amount of minutes she required, because she just takes everything, records everything first take, and that's it.
Right.
And I once had a funny story with her, and I asked her, Celine, I implored her almost, could you maybe play one non-suspended chord for a day? She looked at me, no, Florian, that's impossible. What? Don't you interfere with it? She's lovely. She's awesome. Yeah.
Great. She's great. And last but not least, there's you.
Yeah.
Providing the framework for all of those people to do their thing. And I think that's quite extraordinary how you do that, and how all of this evolves in a way that is free. We used the word unobstructed before. I think that's quite fitting. But also there's a clear communication there. There's clear boundaries as to what this is supposed to be and what it's not supposed to be. Could you talk a little bit about your what goes on in your mind when you're setting up a framework like Ingurgitating Oblivion, where on one hand, everything goes because it's very free and there's experimentation and there's a freedom to explore textures and playing styles that are not used traditionally in death metal, which I absolutely adore. But at the same time, you have a clear vision of what you want to do. So what goes on in your mind when you construct an Ingurgitating Oblivion song?
First of all, I think meanwhile, there is like a filter. Right, and I don't allow an arbitrary lot of people into the band, but I'm very picky. And back in the days, when you had to find some sort of arrangement, and because you didn't have a car, but you wanted to kind of, create some music with the people who were just located in that village or wherever, that's a different time. Meanwhile, I'm very picky, and I invite people, and I don't invite people, right? And those who are there, I would have listened to what they do, how they perform, what kind of taste, what kind of expression there is, what kind of sound there is, and then I go like, okay, let's approach this person, right? And that's one key element to me, at least, so that I invite people and others I don't invite, and so that kind of creates the sound. When it comes to me personally, I have always been practicing quite a lot on the guitar. So a lot of techniques, just like you, I suppose, but obviously there is differences as well. But I studied John Petrucci, Satriani, John Abercrombie, Telje Ripda. We talked briefly about him. Yeah. So what do they do? And all the sweep picking stuff Petrucci would do, I would study it non-stop, and certainly the Holdsworthian legato techniques and stuff like that. And what I always found enriching, rewarding personally, was to kind of master some sort of technique. For some, like 10, 15 years ago, I was totally into sweep picking, loved it, and I would sort of incorporate the whole thing into my riffs, but not trying to sound like Necrophagist or something, right? But I would always apply it right away. That's one thing. I listened to a lot of Prokofiev, a lot of Ligeti, a lot of Dvorak, a lot of Shostakovich, and they probably influenced me in some way. There is also always an atmospheric thing. So I do remember when I listened to Tristan and Isolde for the first time, Wagner, Der Tod und das Mädchen, Death and the Maiden, Death and the Girl, whatever. I realized, Die Winterreise, there is something atmospheric which I totally, something resonates inside of me. And that's this atmosphere within, which makes me create certain, riffs, certain lines, and so on. So it's this mixture of applying technique, which I find interesting, loads of intervals I studied and stuff like that. So when I was into Ligeti, for instance, right, all these, cacophonous things he used to do, I would apply straight away. There is this atmosphere within which I can characterize as longing, yearning, melancholy, and freedom. As tacky it sounds, it's freedom. And that's something I transport and I sort of convey through the music, I guess. Yeah. It's difficult to analyze such a thing, usually I just do it.
Do you have any sort of academical background in music? Any formal training?
Yeah, I used to enjoy training as with a jazz guy. I forgot his name, but that's in my teenage years. But then it was really the good old VHS times.
No shit.
Ripped some John Petrucci and Abercrombie
and locked yourself in the
tutorials
basement for months.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And just with a posture like this, and then wondering, why does my back ache?
Yeah, we certainly all have been there.
Yeah.
But was there any formal musical education, as in terms of reading music, writing music on paper, ear training, theoretical background?
Yeah. I mean, I can kind of write things down and all that, and think of the music technically. I can do that. I used to kind of play some classical guitar tunes. But that's mainly my teenage years. I got very, very frustrated by it, and because I had this feeling, it doesn't have to be true for everybody, but certainly felt true to me. I felt, in a way, limited by it, and I could always relate more easily to okay, this is the way you do it. This is the shape, and this is the arpeggio. This is kind of how it evolves, and this is the transition. Blah blah blah. And like the Petrucci videos, they were super kind of illuminating to me personally. And I would, at a certain point, stop thinking, does it make sense theoretically if I change if I progress the chord like blah 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 blah. Never thought, there's this funny story about Lille Gruber. Maybe we shared it before. I don't know, recall, but he for months or for weeks he thought about, okay, I have this one riff. And the second one, and it's a different key, and it sounds like... and he's been thinking about it, and then he listened to Mariah Carey or...
It is always Mariah Carey with him.
And then he had this epiphany and a dawn on him, and okay, this is how I I'm not like that. Even though I adore and I totally find it fascinating to work like this, but I just do it. And so yes, I like to refer to me as a dilettante in a way. I studied excessively techniques like legato and Holdsworthian chord progressions. Yes, I usually tap things down also to not to forget certain ideas and elements. But what I do mostly is just free flowing, and I don't fucking care.
Right.
But especially when it comes to the second guitar voice, I'm very analytical and I know exactly what I do. I know so I need this in that interval because otherwise it's going to be predictable, and I don't like predictability. Blah 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 blah. Mm-hmm. That's something I do. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I find that fascinating what you said about multiple dilettante, because I feel I'm the same way, and I feel that all the people that you have assembled in this project, they could potentially be characterized that way, because it takes a little bit of a beginner's mindset, of an exploratory nature that is not necessarily always easily combinable with strict theoretical framework to go certain places, or to even assume that those places can be reached, that they exist, and you have to find them. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what I mean, and this. In literature, there is the concept of naivete, and that's exactly what, and that's usually a prerogative of children, and then you unlearn naivete, because you superimpose rationality into all that, especially in the Western world, world, and that's something I have done without, and I try to kind of, get rid of these inclinations within when I play music, and I want to have this, as you said, beginner's mindset, which is extremely impressionable and open and fragile and subtle and all that, because children ask questions all the time because they are so deeply, profoundly fascinated by the world, because they haven't gone through all these revisions and repetitions over and over again. And that's something I cherish. That's something I treasure quite a lot, and I try to stick to that notion of naivete in my music. Yes, very much so.
Right. So, to wrap this up?
Yeah.
What can we expect for the near future? So, when is the new album due? When it's going to come out, and what is next after that?
Will be published probably in fall. Certainly in fall 2022, so this year, on Willowtip Records, who are awesome, great people, very. They are they have this claim of forward-thinking metal, and they are forward-thinking. I think they are open, they are bold. They have published so many relevant metal albums over the last 2 decades almost. So Willowtip this fall. Next steps, probably Norbert and I will take a bit of a break to recharge our creative batteries, not to get on one another's nerves anymore, which is always peaceful, always easygoing, but I think we need a break. And I think at some point we want to perform 4 to 5 songs, so that's possibly next objective, and I think in the long run, obviously, the next album.
Right.
And there will be some music videos there in the works with a very talented lady from the States, and that's going to be another quite big project, a real music video for one of the tracks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Any plans after that? Do you already have another piece of inspiration locked in for where the musical concept is going to go, or do you just figure that out when you cross that bridge?
It will just happen. Exactly as you said, figure it out. When walking across the bridge, probably. And but one question I always ask myself: what's the justification for the next album?
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be justified. It can't just be, oh well, that's what I do, right?
Yeah.
I just need to go on. But there needs to be some spark, some initial spark, and some emotion, and there needs to be, at least from my point of view, some sort of progression, some sort of advancement, and therefore some sort of change. I don't want to play the same or produce and publish the same music over and over again, and this progression needs to be there, and I can't, and if I could, I wouldn't share it with you. But I'm super positive there will be some sort of idea, some sort of, this is a change, this is a progression, this hasn't been there before, and then once I have this feeling, this state of mind, then I'll go forward.
Right. I think that's a beautiful closing statement. So
it's been a pleasure,
thank you, my friend. And so Willowtip Records in the fall, Ontology of Naught, Ingurgitating Oblivion.
Yes.
All right.
Including some shit musicians.
Right.
Like me.